Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 3, Episode 5. It's called The List. So spoilers for the episode, as always. This one's about a prisoner who is executed and seemingly comes back to life, or has someone working for him who is killing the people that he had vendettas with after his death. But is it really him? Is it some sort of reincarnation? That's the word that's brought up a lot in the episode, or some demonic ghost, whatever you want to call it. But that's the main focus of the episode. A couple of interesting guest stars in this one as well, including Ken Faree, who I know mainly from the original Dawn of the Dead. Younger people might know him more as the dad from Kenan and Kel, and even the people who know him from that aren't that young anymore. I don't know what the super young people know Ken Faree from, but yeah, I honestly don't really have strong feelings about this one way or the other. I don't think it's a bad episode, but I don't think it's a particularly exciting episode either. The core mystery never really compelled me all that much, but I don't really have much to complain about either. I just never really found myself all that invested in the central thing. The elements that stuck out the most to me more than anything was really just the heavy stuff kind of in the first half, which was a lot of like Scully's discomfort of being in like the prison and all the prisoners staring at her and just having that constant feeling of they're watching her because they don't usually see a woman in here. And just that feeling and the way that was captured, you know, looking down the row of cells and the idea of it being a long walk. It was kind of like what that scene from early in Silence of the Lambs does when Khaleesi Starling is going to Hannibal Lecter's cell and she has to go past all the other ones. You know, there's like one or two moments that are kind of like that. Not as well executed, obviously, because that's like a, you know, a classic movie that won a lot of awards for good reason. But kind of like inching on that kind of territory, and I thought that stuff was fairly effective, and even just a couple of little beats. You know, Chris Carter, I noticed, both wrote and directed this episode, and I think the direction is probably the strongest part of it. There's just these little moments where, even at the start of the episode, when Mulder's just telling Scully there's been this murder of a prison guard, and it's kind of suspicious because of the reasons. And Scully kind of looks over her shoulder to end the scene in this kind of ominous, like, that is confusing. We have to solve that. I don't have a good answer for that, and I don't like that. The look she gives over her shoulder, the way it's captured in this sort of tight close-up, I thought was just an effective little piece of framing. There's just little things in the direction in this episode that I found myself enjoying. But the actual story, I was just kind of, whatever about. Maybe one of the problems is that it's a 42-minute, X-Files episode, and we have a lot of characters in this story, just by the nature of what the story is. That this prisoner was executed, right, and that's what the episode opens with, and we get kind of the build-up to his death, and him vowing to come back, and all the rest of it. But we have the warden of the prison, we have several prison guards, a couple of whom get enough to be memorable. There's a couple of prisoners who we get to know because they're important to the story. You've got the man who was killed at the start, his wife, the prisoner's wife. You've got a lawyer character, and they're all kind of like, I would say the warden is the one that comes out getting the most time and the most development, and he's kind of an evil warden, as it turns out. We kind of see that he's corrupt. I feel like the 90s loved the corrupt warden, between Shawshank, which was around this time period, and a few other things. The corrupt warden was a big thing in the 90s, but almost every other guest character is kind of about an equal level of importance, give or take, right? I'm sure if we sat down and like really thought about it, we could maybe rank them in terms of how important they are to the story, or just how much screen time they get. But I feel like they're all pretty similar. I thought Ken Faree was going to be like a more important character, but he's actually kind of off camera for a lot of the episode. And while his role and what the story's supposed to be is kind of important, it's not something where we get to see him do a lot of it or focus on him. If anything, he's kind of just a red herring more than anything else. And I felt like a lot of the characters didn't really get enough development to be that intriguing on their own, except the warden, who of course like kills a couple of prisoners. Probably the most exciting plot detail in the whole episode is that the warden uses the fact that there's a serial killer killing prisoners and prison guards to kill a prisoner he doesn't like, so he can blame it on the killer, right? It's basically, hey, not our problem. That said, though, he does kill someone at the end of the episode after they believe they've caught the murderer. Now, Mulder and Scully, well, I should say, Mulder doesn't actually believe they've caught the guy. He thinks that they've made a mistake. He thinks that Ken Faree wasn't actually the killer for various reasons. You know, he has a big list of them. In fact, he gets all dramatic about it. He can't just like tell her this in the car. He has to stop the car in a random bit of road and get out and be all dramatic about, I just don't buy it, Scully. I don't buy that it's him for this reason, that reason, and that reason. And I'm like, you could have just said all this whilst driving. I don't know why we're doing the big dramatic stop and talk where they both get out of the car. Aside from, of course, the fact that they get to notice the warden drive past them, so we can end the episode on the warden's death. Because that's what it's all building up to, is that the warden's the fifth man on the list. The idea that this guy who was killed, Nietzsche, who was executed, he would hate the warden most of all, and it would all be building up to getting him. Because there's a couple of other deaths, right? So we had the guard who was killed that wasn't part of the list, and we also... Did Ken Faree's count as part of the list? I don't think it did. Because there was a guard that was killed before, you know, we didn't really get to meet. There's the one that we get to meet where Scully talks to him a bunch with a mustache. The actor I recognise from Smallville. He's second. Nietzsche isn't on the list, but the lawyer is. I guess Ken Faree did count, because I can't think of another death. I guess he did. I guess the ghost or the reincarnation of Nietzsche manipulating his girlfriend, or his wife I should say, it's his wife, into killing Ken Faree, who she's having an affair with, if you can even call it that at this point. Seemingly sometime in the 11 years he was in prison waiting for execution, she eventually started seeing this prisoner. Although he just moved here 6 months ago, the warden says, so I guess it was a recent thing. But that's making her paranoid that he's going to be out to get her. Maybe makes Ken Faree's character a little paranoid that he's like on the list as well. But ultimately, there's so many characters to juggle that I don't know if I ever really felt like I really got invested in the who was going to die next. Which is weird, because I like horror movies, and I like horror movies with a body count. But I guess part of the issue is that we weren't seeing murders in this episode, by and large. Most of the kills happen off screen, and it's more about discovering the bodies. And the bodies are in places that don't make any real sense, that imply there's something supernatural. Like, all of a sudden, there's a head just in this bucket of paint, and then the body that belongs to that head is in the warden's office, like, the next day. Like, clearly someone has access to a place that is typically pretty hard to get through without the right set of keys, because it's a prison. So, that makes Mulder even suggest at one point maybe someone who's a guard is behind it, perhaps, because they've got access to things, assuming it is just a real person, and not something that's supernatural. But I think that's the other thing that I maybe find a little underwhelming about it, is that I don't think the debate of it being something supernatural ever really comes to the forefront of the discussion or the episode. Yeah, obviously early on, Mulder kind of gives Scully a few looks, and Scully says, well, it can't be him. You know, every time Mulder says, well, it can't be this guy or that guy, Scully makes sarcastically say, what do you think it's Nietzsche? Nietzsche being the dead prisoner. And he doesn't really have a good response, but it never really... I don't know if it ever really gets to the point where I felt satisfied that they kind of like proposed the idea. Like, I really wish they went further with that idea of, oh, like whoever's committing these murders are doing it in ways that aren't possible. You know, like where the bodies are being left or how they've been killed is just simply not possible for a regular person to be doing. And just always have that maybe sitting there if they wanted to really drive the supernatural angle. Now, admittedly, it was so light that I actually thought the twist was going to be that it wasn't going to be supernatural. I really thought they were going to say that Ken Faree had been killing these people. And I think that I was thinking that that's why they intentionally had his character be bald, just like the prisoner who died, right? So they're both bald black men. And there's one moment when the lawyer's getting killed where you just see like the tip of the head, but you don't see like the full face or anything. And I thought that was intentionally going, oh, you think it's the dead guy, but maybe they're going to like say, later on, oh no, that was actually, Ken Faree. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think it was Ken Faree in that scene. I think it was the actor playing Nietzsche who was there. What was his name? Baja Jolie, or Jola, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologies if I'm not. But I thought that, like, okay, they filmed it with him, but I thought maybe, like, hey, you saw a bald man. It was actually Ken Faree, because he's also bald and black, right? I thought they were maybe setting up the seeds for that being the misdirect later on, and it turning out that this guy is just doing all this either because he was close to Nietzsche, or maybe he was using Nietzsche as an excuse to kill people that he didn't like, or something. It's hard to say, really. And there was other elements that I just didn't really find all that compelling. I think the two prisoners who ultimately get killed by the warden, one of whom's an actor that I recognise, Bokeem Woodbine, was in Fargo season 2, and he's one of those guys that's popped up in a lot of small roles in various things. He's a bit younger here, obviously, than I'm used to seeing him, but I recognised him. I mean, not enough to remember where he was from, but I was like, oh, I know that face, and I looked him up. He is Roke, and he gets killed by the warden like halfway through. And then later on, Speranza is the other prisoner who's been talking to Mulder a few times, and it hasn't been particularly helpful, but he ultimately gets killed at the end as well. I really thought these two characters were fairly underdeveloped in the grand scheme of things. I never really quite understood what their relationship to the prisoner was, to Nietzsche. Like, were they friends? Were they close? Were they just kind of, like, around him, and they were therefore scared of him? It was kind of tough to tell, to be honest. And I think that may just be a victim of having too many characters to juggle in this episode, where I never really felt like, I felt like, yeah, they're the victims here when the warden decides to just start beating them to death, right? Because that's what the warden does. He takes them to the shower room and just beats them. And obviously, yeah, he's a bad guy. This just should not be happening to these prisoners. But it would have been really nice to, like, get to know them a little bit. Maybe not both of them. Admittedly, that may be quite tough. But maybe the second one, Speranza, the one who makes it to the end of the episode, maybe, like, give us an idea that he has some, it's just give us something we can feel some empathy for, aside from the death itself, right? Aside from when he's killed. Maybe something where, like, he really believes in the people who are being killed because he knows they all treated Nietzsche badly. Because that was the other thing that I think I was expecting, is I was expecting everyone Nietzsche was going after to turn out to be genuinely bad. Because they kept saying about Nietzsche that over the 11 years that he was in prison, he's a really smart guy, and he became very philosophical, and that's why he was talking a lot about resurrection, because he became very religious. And the warden even says at one point, if he was still on the outside, he might have won a Nobel Prize. And when we find out about his crime, we find out that he was, like, the getaway driver for someone in a robbery who killed someone. Now, the other guy died on the scene, but he got all the punishment. He's the one who got he got sentenced to death, and he's been waiting for it ever since. So I really would have liked the idea that everyone he was going after, and we definitely get this from the warden. The warden is absolutely a bastard, right? He's an evil scumbag, and it's very clear that there's some justice in this revenge. It would have been really interesting to see that also be the case for the others, whereas some of the others, it feels a bit more like he is just being, like, the ghost of Nietzsche is just being petty. Like the lawyer, for example, just kind of admits that, yeah, like, I got his case. I was the appointed attorney. I was only 26. I was far too young for a case like that. I didn't really have a hope in hell. I had no business doing that, but he couldn't afford a proper, like, lawyer, a private lawyer, so it was me. So him being, like, killed feels a little bit more, like, I almost wanted to feel a little bit more like I was rooting for Nietzsche at a certain point to go after some really bad people who maybe did have it coming. But I don't think all of them clearly do. And it's definitely ambiguous with the guards. Like, they seem like they might be assholes, but are they being abusive? I guess if they're helping the warden kill prisoners, then yeah, they probably do deserve it and do have it coming. But, not all of them do. And I at least, I wish there was, like, either really make me care about who he's going after in the sense that I'm rooting for it. And, they kind of skirt that line with the warden, right? Because the warden is a bastard. And there's even that great line from, I think it's Speranza. I don't know, maybe it was Roke. Maybe it was Roke who said it before he died, because it was early in the list. Or early in the episode, I should say. where he says, hey, you're number 5. What does it feel like to be on death row, right? To the warden. This idea that he's been, the one in charge of all these prisoners who are awaiting death, and now he finally has to feel that dread of death coming. Like, that's like an interesting, turn. It's a nice swerve and irony for a character who has been abusing that position like he seemingly has been. And that's probably the strongest thematic idea of the episode, is the idea of the justice against him, for him taking any kind of pleasure in the power that he has, abusing that power in any number of ways that he might have been doing. But yeah, I really could have done with some fleshing out of a couple of characters here, or maybe fleshing out the potential supernatural element of it. As it is, it's one of those episodes where Mulder and Scully at a certain point don't feel like they're that important to the episode. Everything's pretty much going to play out regardless of their involvement. And they're not really going to figure anything out by the end. And that's not necessarily bad on its own in a vacuum. But if that's what's going to happen, if it's going to become more about the guest stars rather than the main characters, then I would want them to be more compelling, right? Usually the fallback I have when I'm not as into the freak of the week plot, as it were, would be that, but there's good Mulder and Scully stuff, and it feels like they're feeling something, or they're growing because of this experience, or they at least have good chemistry and interactions because of it. And I don't think this episode kind of lent itself to that, because we had so many characters to spend time with that Mulder and Scully are basically just doing the bare minimum at a certain point of coming in and explaining what's going on, or questioning the right things and advancing the plot, and that's it. There's no room for them to flourish or have their little moments that I like, or the banter that I enjoy. So yeah, it's not even like I say, the main plot is bad. It just I don't find it that compelling, but it's so stuffed that elements of it aren't developed as much as I would like, and then it also leaves no time for Mulder and Scully to feel like they're still the central part of the episode. So yeah, it kind of leaves me in a sort of middling place where I don't find any one particular element of this all that satisfying, which is a shame, because I do think there's some good directing in this episode. Like I said, I think some of this early stuff is very moody when they're going through the prison for the first time. I think the opening's directed very strongly, but I think I think there's maybe just too much weight on the premise at a certain point for it to really deliver on everything that it could be delivering on, and I was left kind of unsatisfied by the end. So it's a shame. I wish I liked it more. It does have a pretty decent rating on IMDb, so I might be in the minority on this one. People may like this one more than I do, generally speaking, but that's how I feel about it. That is the list. Let's have a look and see what's coming next time on the X-Files. The next one's called Too Shy, and that is spelt with the number 2, and then the word shy, but with no space. It's all sort of one word. Too Shy. Tushy? Is it meant to be Tushy? I guess that makes sense. Are we talking about butts? Asses? Big, round, juicy buttocks? Is that what we're talking about? I doubt it somehow. Let me read the description on IMDb for Too Shy, or Tushy, depending on how it's supposed to be said. Shy... Okay, so it's the word shy. I guess it's not Tushy then. Shy, overweight women are being pursued online by a suitor who courts them with Italian poetry. The women are being found dead, their corpses stripped of flesh. Okay, so it's a serial killer who... It's funny that I made a reference to Silence of the Lambs this episode, because that's very Buffalo Bill, by the sounds of it. Maybe not the shy part, but the it's not even like the women he went after were necessarily fat, but they were just a bit bigger than sort of slim. So yeah, interesting to see what they do with this. I really have no expectations for this, one way or the other. Although I am a little bit excited about one element, and that is the fact that it's someone who is using the internet to get his victims. I wouldn't care about that in anything that's made today, but something from the mid-90s using the internet, we could be in for some gold with this, potentially. Just in the way they talk about it, or maybe even the way that they say it works, could be entertaining. I see potential gold in those dated hills, but That said, that's JD cynical expectation aside, hopefully it's good. Hopefully it's a nice tense episode, a bit of killer. So that is what's coming up next time on the X-Files. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV and all that stuff. And of course, I'm skipping ahead to my final line. Patreon is how you can support the channel, and also Mail Fuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. Check out that. You can get bonus content over there and ensure all the reviews keep coming. And of course, you can like, subscribe, and let me know what you thought of this episode of X-Files in the comments. It's always fun to hear, especially when some of these episodes are very divisive, I find, or I have like a weird opinion that no one else seems to. Always curious to see. But that is the show, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?